Chapter 8. Entry. This is the tale of MacGregor and Sybil. MacGregor was the model image of a white monk of St. Marcus. His sense of right and wrong was infallible, his bravery knew no bounds. He was already a fairly well-known bandit in his parish, and often patrolled the streets around his town against bandits. When he found out about Clan Nutsy, he saw a place where he could help spread goodness and glorify Ivalice. Clan Nutsy welcomed his devout goodness and strong arm into the fold with open arms. Young Sybil had been a fencer since she was old enough to hold a rapier. She was a shrewd and calculating mercenary who had been captain of her own small bandit clan that robbed people going into the Salika wood. When she found out about Clan Nutsy, she saw a place to hone her skills and get a lot more plunder than by jumping small parties. Clan Nutsy welcomed her substantial cunning and admirable skill into the fold with open arms. As it was, they did not welcome each other with open arms. MacGregor saw Sybil as everything he went against, a devious witch who preyed on those weaker than herself for her own selfish reasons. She was a spiritualist as well as a fencer, and as she grew, she started to gain power from the divine spirits of nature. He disparagingly called her powers a pagan patchwork of deceit and trickery. Sybil had the same sentiment about MacGregor, and thought of him as a holier-than-thou fanatic with laughable intelligence. Only a fool would think he knows what's best for everyone, and enforces people's lives as he sees fit, she would say. His powers came from his faith in Ivalice, and Sybil always wrote them off not as gifts, but as a trade for his freedom and soul. At first, this only was shown when they worked together, so the clan tried to keep them apart as much as possible. Unfortunately, this wasn't always possible, and it was on one mission that tensions ran so high, these two major members of the clan actually attacked each other. The mission was compromised, and Marsh finally decided that they should be let go. "This is all your fault!" the two yelled at each other. Despite their feelings, necessity demanded that they travel together at least to Baguba. On the way there, they noticed a yacht that would take them to the port city considerably quicker. They agreed to go through, but not for the reason that the one thought the other was agreeing upon. They each saw this as an opportunity to kill the other. The 20 vampires laying in the yacht in wait of a stupid party decided they wouldn't have any of that though. If anyone was going to kill anybody, it was going to be them. Though such an obviously futile battle, the two fought for the smallest chance of survival. White magic and exorcisms flew through the air desperately as the two fought with, and to a certain extent for the other. Finally, it appeared as if they would make it. One vampire came up behind Sybil. Busily fending off 3 more undead, she was unprepared for the fourth to put the bite on her. MacGregor heard the crunch of bone, and stared at the vampire. Sybil lay in its hands, dead. Looking at her, he saw what the Viera Elementalist really was. Lying dead at the hands of the fiend was nothing more than a young girl, smarter than most, but still insecure. He realized he had no idea what a girl had to go through to become as powerful as she was. For the first time, his eyes were opened to his greatest failure. Despite his vows, he had neglected the one most obvious person who needed his protection and guidance. Exorcising the vampire who had done the deed, he tenderly picked up the limp frame of his former clanner, and felt a sorrow. What would things have been like if they had found some way to get along? Could it have been possible? He began to sob. Why should this happen? Those sobs turned to growls. This shouldn't have happened. The growls to howls. the price for this happening will be severe." Then he let out a heartfelt battle yell in the fine tradition of St. Marcus Templars. Holy magic struck him from above, and washed over the entire yacht. Wave upon wave of pure divine power saturated the area, the whole place turned into a land of blinding whites and stark blacks. The vampires burst into flames, crumbled to dust, then blew away. The very buildings buckled in on themselves and sunk into the ground. Finally, after channeling so much raw magic, MacGregor himself fainted, only to wake up later on. As he got up, he mused that he felt very, very different. He felt more graceful, less sluggish. With this, he scratched his head. But wait, what's this stuff on top of his pate? Is that hair? And his skin, it was no longer scaly, but slightly fuzzy. Thinking quickly, he looked into an available pool. His snout had shortened, his orange skin had become a more burnt sienna color, and upon his head was a shock of white hair. "What's happened to me?" he asked. "And where did this pool come from?" "MacGregor?" a soft voice behind him asked. The sword of Bangor looked to see what he thought was a Vieira, but just barely. This one had grown a long tapering tail, her eyes were more reptilian, and the chocolate hue of most Vieira was instead a rich golden color. "Sybil?" MacGregor asked in a bewildered tone. "You're alive?" "I'm not sure. What happened to you?" "What happened to you?" "I think we might be qualified to answer that." Before them stood two of the most imposing figures in the history of Ivalice. One was a great dragon, bigger than any seen on Ivalice before him. His smoldering eyes belied the wisdom of centuries. The other was a great tree whose very presence demanded humility. The totems Adramelech and Exodus stood before them, the spiritual patrons of their races. "The Bangor draw their power from pride and bravery," Adramelech rumbled. "It is the power to defend your allies and slay your enemies. The Vieira get their power from their veneration of the spirits and cunning. Theirs is the power of surprise, a Vieira can trick a superior opponent into defeat." His voice, like the sound of both the rustling of leaves and the whisper of countless voices, took a different tone. "Despite these gifts you were given, there is a force that easily defeats all of them. This force has killed the greatest heroes, made invincible juggernauts out of the weak, and empowered your people to rise to the heights that you are at today," Adramelech growled. "That force," whispered Exodus, "is love." The two looked at each other. Indeed, MacGregor was feeling something that he had never felt before. It was like what fueled his devotion to protect people, but somehow, stronger still. He wanted to pull Sybil in and protect her with his body. No one could take her from him. Why was he feeling like this? Sybil was wrestling with emotions she had never felt before. She looked at MacGregor and saw a treasure. It was like no kind of treasure she had ever had before. She had no way to gauge its worth, but she wanted to keep it. She would defend it to the death, and she would die with her fingers wrapped around it. This feeling was like the most precious of treasures. It was something you could never buy, and something you should never sell. "Look upon yourselves," came the rumbling of Adramelech. "We had nothing to do with this. The sheer power of your love, MacGregor, brought Sybil back to life, defeated the undead horde, returned this yogg to its former state of beauty, and changed you and Sybil to what you have become. You are now no longer Vieira or Bangor. You have rejected yourselves, walked away from your traditions, your friends,
your family. You have even rejected us."
The two started to fade away.
"Now, you belong only to each other."
McGregor looked into Sybil's eyes. Her big, beautiful dark purple eyes, like two pools into the twilight hour.
"I love you."
Sybil looked up into his face. Wisdom and love shone from his countenance, she just never noticed.
"I love you too."
They shared a tender kiss.
"Let's go back to Clan Nutsy,"
McGregor said. Sybil nodded.
"Let's."
Now when they fought, their power came from each other. True, McGregor still fulfilled the pledge to defend the weak and downtrodden that is integral to his order, and yes, Sybil still pulled power from the elements around her and the arts of the arcane, not to mention a good rapier and excellent reflexes, but their true power came from something far greater. This is the tale of McGregor and Sybil. A tale of how love conquers all. End of entry.
"The tea's done, master,"
Matthias said as he gave Roland a cup. The great sage nodded at him.
"Thank you, apprentice. That will do. Well, while we're here, you might as well do some studying. You've no doubt heard this story when I've gotten too drunk." "I would never have said anything, master,"
Matt said, his face sculpted into careful neutrality.
"Of course not,"
Roland said, his eyes narrowing.
"You know what's good for you. Read the first 4 chapters in Uncommon Beasts of Ivalice, then write me a short essay on the various spells you can gain from the creatures described."
Matt nodded and went off, leaving Roland with Arthur and Joseph. Roland spent some time swirling his tea around before he even started talking. Obviously, this was going to be a bit of an undertaking for him. He finally took a deep breath and began.
"Well, I suppose I'll start at the beginning. I was one of the original members of Clan Nutsy. I had worked with Mont Blanc for many years even before Marsh had come. I was what you would call a battle-ready white mage. I was rather tough for a new Mao, and you could always find me in the fray of any battle, healing right alongside the bruisers. We were a good clan, but not the best."
He then took a dreamy look into his eyes.
"Of course, that all changed when Marsh came. His drive to find a way home gave us a reason to improve. With his ideology fueling us forward and Mont Blanc's strategy and exceptional skills, we quickly rose through the ranks. Of course, as the resident healer, they greatly needed me, and I found myself learning and doing things I would have never even imagined. Ah, those were some amazing days."
He paused for a little smile.
"We would fight almost every day, and then come back to the city in the evening. The wine, the camaraderie, the girls."
His eyebrows arched and he smiled conspiratorially at the other two fellows.
"You must have been quite the heartthrob in your time, Roland,"
Joseph said with a wry grin.
"I'm still only 35, you know,"
Roland said, giving the young Mughal a slight glare.
"Anyway, things were going along just great, but then she came along." "Rachel?"
Arthur asked. He'd read enough ancient sagas at the monastery to know pretty well where this was going. Roland nodded, his eyes losing focus, as they seemed to span years, taking the sage back to his days with his old clan.
"Rachel. As we started to become more popular, more people clamored to join us. Mont Blanc was never one to delegate clan duties, so we never had any branch clans. At the same time, we liked to know the name of everyone in our band, so we were rather exclusive. Every now and then though, some would come that were worth taking in. Sybil became one of the greatest red mages and user of the elemental arts on Ivalice, if not the greatest. MacGregor eventually was welcomed into the Order of St. Gordon as a senior Templar.
"And Rachel," Arthur said, seeking to keep Roland on track.
"Ah yes. Rachel. Arthur, you would never see a more beautiful new Mao in your life. Her hair was so soft and fine, silk was woolen by comparison. It was as white as the virgin snowfall, and her eyes were the two most flawless emeralds that the world had ever seen. This guy may be an amazing sage,"
Joseph thought to himself with a smile,
"but I can see why the bards never took him."
Nonetheless, he was enjoying the story.
"She came along while I was still a rather low-ranked sage. I was still the de facto white mage, but the high-level solo missions were coming more and more. What this meant was that many of these recent clanners who were taking on rather challenging missions didn't have any support. Tony, our paladin, knew a bit of white magic, as did Sybil, but they had other things they were dedicated to. We needed another white mage, and this young woman named Rachel responded. Of course, as the main healer, she was to be my pupil. This came to my dismay." "What was wrong with her?"
Arthur asked.
"Was she a sub-PAR student? Did she have a bad attitude?"
Joseph said, now really getting into the story.
"Oh no, nothing like that,"
Roland said while tamping some tobacco down into his pipe and lit it. He'd decided that if he was going to go through with this story, he was going to need a soothing smoke.
"Do you smoke, Joseph?"
he said, offering the pouch.
"I have some cigarette paper, if you so desire."
Joseph shook his head.
"It's a bad habit to have when you're working with tons of mining grade explosive, Kupo. Just continue with the story."
Roland nodded.
"Well, like I said, I had no problems like that with her. She was actually a very good student, quite eager. Well learned and with a respectable bit of natural magic talent. No, the only problem was that she was a woman."
This stunned the two listeners. Arthur, rather confusedly, finally managed to ask,
"Roland, are you a bigot?"
Roland inhaled deeply from his pipe and blew the smoke out of his nose.
"Why, the biggest there is, my priestly friend. Now don't look at me like that."
He waved a hand platonically at his two dumbfounded comrades.
"I can assure you both that it has nothing to do with some ignorant hate or stupid rationalization. It is purely a preference. I would rather have a girl give me a drink and maybe a kiss than have her run me through with a rapier, blast me with black magic, or send a torrent of chocobos upon me. I realize it is an antiquated notion, as it was an antiquated notion 90 years ago. As it was, I was reluctant to teach such an obvious girl, but most unfortunately, she did show a lot of promise. So I decided just to work her to the point that she would quit." "But she didn't, did she?"
Arthur asked. Roland looked at him curiously.
"Have I already told this story while inebriated? I hope I didn't. I have a tendency to cry, as I understand. We St. Gregory monks have a certain sense of narrative inevitability. You know, I actually did a treatise on that once,"
Roland said.
"Kupo, get with the story,"
Joseph said, having an idea what an innocent conversation like that could become.
"You two can talk about brainy stuff on your own time, Kupo." Yes, very well. I hope you can appreciate the irony in a 21-year-old high-ranking mining engineer calling us brainy. Well, to make a long story short, since some people," he glared at Joseph again, "are getting impatient, she took everything I threw at her in stride. I threw her to the corals, both figuratively and literally, and she came out without a scratch. I was amazed, and even impressed. To my immense displeasure, she was more than just a pretty face. She actually intrigued me, this girl Rachel did. Through the training, I learned a lot about her, and she probably learned more about me than I'd have liked. As often happens, we became more intimate, and we had a bit of a...
He paused a moment, lost in thought.
A relationship. It was a wonderful time in my life. Now I would go out fighting each day, then Rachel would tend my wounds. We'd share a tender kiss. It was bliss. There was a rocky bit where I was afraid of getting much closer to her, lest I lose my freedom. I'm ashamed to say I did a bit of philandering. I thank Ultima every day that Rachel had the sense to beat me to a pulp but not leave me. I realized that she was the best thing that had ever happened to me and decided to take the plunge. We got married a little while after Marsh had left, but then our goals became different. I, as a sage, had decided to dedicate the rest of my life to studying the intricacies of magic. She had recently renounced being a white mage and a clanner, in hopes of helping to rebuild the Ivalice government. So what happened? Oh, nothing so dramatic as one might think. I would stay in my cave, experimenting and such with the nature of magic, and she'd come whenever she could. I would do the same thing as time permitted. We made it work. Apparently, we even had children.
He said, laughing a tiny bit.
You can imagine how surprised I was to see Rachel. Your fall gave us a pretty good idea, Kupo. She's the spitting image of her great-grandmother,
Roland said, ignoring Joseph.
But then, after 3 months, she didn't come back. I waited, and did as I always did, which was my research. Then the accident happened, I went to sleep for almost a century, and time marched on. I have no problems with the fact she's dead, that's to be expected.
With this, he took a long pull from his pipe and let it out with a sigh.
I just wish that I knew where she was buried. Nowhere I have been since I woke up has any account of her. It must be hard,
Arthur said. Roland sighed again.
Yes, it is. Well, that's the end of that. Now if you'll excuse me, I'll be in my quarters. I hope you all enjoyed story time. Thanks for sharing, Kupo,
Joseph said.
I appreciate you'd be open with us. I appreciate you listening, for all your quips, little Moogle,
Roland said and smiled a bit darkly.
I just hope you think better of doing such a thing with a sage who isn't so pleasant. Good night.
Arthur laid down on the couch.
I'll sleep here tonight. You can share the room with Matt. There's 2 beds in his suite.
Joseph nodded and yawned.
It's been a really long day, Kupo. Good night.
Opening the door to his room, he saw Matt on one of the beds, reading from a rather thick book and occasionally scratching something in a large leather-bound notebook. To Joseph, Matt was even more of an oddity than his chain-smoking drunkard of a master. They had just been on the run since morning time. Everyone was tired to the bone, but Matt always looked like he had just taken a nap and had run a couple of laps. The boy seemed to exude an infinite amount of aggressive energy. This is funny because so far, Matt had proven to be nothing more than a rather obedient young man.
Matt Kupo,
he said as he settled into his own bed. Geez, it felt like it was made of the feathers of angel babies.
I wish I had some men who could work like you back at the mines, Kupo. You've spent the entire day running from judges and carting around anywhere from 200 to 300 pounds of luggage and new Mao, but don't look any worse for it, Yeah, actually, it sort of sucks. Coupeau?
Mont Blanc asked curiously, feeling another story coming along. This was quite a day for unveiling his party members' weirdness.
Oh, I guess your master's always giving you ridiculous tasks since he knows you can do them, Coupeau. Well, there's that, yeah.
With this, Matt closed his book and rolled up his right shirt sleeve.
But there's also this.
Starting at his shoulder and continuing down to the bottom of his bicep was a mass of swirling insidious writing.
It goes all the way down to my right lung. What the heck is that, Coupeau? That is the word of will, a powerful artifact I stole from my master. Coupeau.
Joseph weakly realized he had been sucked into another story.
Why would you steal from your master? Yeah, see, I was a thief before I was with master. Worked for a gang of punks in Cyril. I had some natural magic ability, which I used to my advantage when stealing. I'd heard about this haunted cave right outside of Katoen, which had untold magical treasures that could drive you mad. I was actually hoping to steal a few choice things, send them to a Sproum bank account, rat out the gang, and buy myself a house far far away from Cyril. Sounds like that gang was pretty bad, Coupeau.
Matt shook his head.
Nah, I just wanted out. Anyway, the first thing I saw when I got in and managed to live through some of the more malevolent traps was a huge book out on a dusty desk. I saw this huge word inscribed on 12 vellum pages. I couldn't read the word, but it said word of will in the margin, and something about having the endurance of 12 bulls. That sort of excited me, you know? I had never done real magic before, but I had a feel for it, so I wrote the whole thing out on my body in the blood of a rabbit I caught and did the necessary spell. I don't remember what happened for the 2 weeks after that. I just remember waking up to see the cave much cleaner and master standing over me. He said that I had been moving so quickly for 2 weeks that I'd cleaned the cave, organized his books and projects, and woke him up. He also said that the word was sucking up not only all of my latent magic, but was also trying to gain power from my life force. If he hadn't managed to subdue me, I would have died of overexertion. As it is, now only master can restrict the effects, and he's teaching me magic so I'll be able to one day do it on my own.
Joseph stretched and closed his book. He had been doing his studies while spinning his yarn.
So what about you, Joseph? What's your story?
Snark. Matt looked up, and unsurprisingly saw Joseph snoring away in the other bed. He shrugged and got under his own covers. He didn't need to sleep what with the word of will and everything, but he'd always enjoyed it, and old habits died hard. And so, after a few days of uneasy sleep and bad conditions, the group drifted off into blissful slumber. Meanwhile, not everyone was sleeping so soundly. Uther Brinker, mayor of Baguba, was up reading through Airship Commission reports. The Brinkers had been mayors of Baguba for 4 generations now, mainly because no one else wanted to be. It was boring, merciless work keeping such a small but rich city like Baguba afloat, and the pay was not as good as some people think. After all, it was a monthly salary taken from city taxes, and citizens would be rather angry if the mayor of their city was getting rich off of their taxes. Luckily, the Brinkers were already Spartan in manner and the Bagubians rather respected their somber family tradition, as it made them excellent leaders. Uther had run the city for 20 years now, and needed but 2 hours of sleep a day, which he got at 3 o'clock face down on his desk. It was a god-awful job being mayor, but someone had to do it. He was rather surprised when his secretary, a cute young intern from the Baguba College of Business, came in. She looked like a rabbit staring down the barrel of a riot gun.
There's a fellow named Carl Victorson and his partner Cassandra saying they are representing Katsu Cross, Kupo. Shall I bring them in, Mr. Brinker?
Uther rubbed his eyes. Why did the government insist on coming in at such an hour?
Yes, send them in, Kupo. You may leave, though, Carly. No doubt your boy's waiting for you, Kupo.
Carly blushed a bit and thanked Uther before scurrying out. After she left, the two government officers came in. They were both wearing the standard uniform of Katsu's Black Eagles, his secret police force of elite judge masters. This was a black officer's outfit, with a black cap and a fine steel cuirass. The Mughal, Carl, had a pistol stuck in his holster, while Miss Cassandra had a rapier strapped to her shapely hip. It was odd to see a pair of eagles in uniform, as they were a plainclothes unit used to monitor the city. Katsu couldn't take control of the individual cities, for they had been too independent for too long. Still, no governor knew how many eagles there were in his city, and that kind of surveillance led to good behavior.
Kupo, how may I help you too? Would you like a drink to drive out the cold?
Uther waved to the small wet bar in his office.
I've allowed Carly the night off, so I'll get it for you, Kupo. We want to keep this short, Kupo. We only want to know how the investigations are going for the suspects who burst through the city this morning. We would also like a warrant to search the house of Eric Winston.
Uther nodded. He knew that this would come.
Quite frankly, I don't think it's any of your business how the investigation is going, Kupo. Oh, and no, you can't have a warrant. Katsu and you judge masters have jurisdiction over anywhere in Ivalice Kupo, but you only have whatever power within the city that the city gives you. Baguba law states that all investigations are conducted by the local city watch, and you are allowed if and only if I give you permission. You haven't asked for it, and I doubt I'd give it, Kupo. You Black Eagles are a bit too shady for my liking, and I think the watch will do fine without your help, Kupo. If that's all, you'd better get back to Cyril and tell His Eminence that Baguba belongs to itself, and no man. We'll pay our tariffs, give you soldiers, make you airships, but we still belong to ourselves, Kupo. I hear a storm's coming in from Sproum, so you'd best hurry if you want to make it to Cyril, Kupo.
The two eagles stood in silence. They knew that the Brinkers were frank and honest, but to make such an obvious attack on the Supreme Judge Master's authority. This was going to be more trouble than they thought. Carl dipped his head a bit in acknowledgement of Uther.
Kupo. Very well, Mr. Brinker. We shall see each other again, I'm sure, Kupo. Come along, Cassandra.
The two exited the building and headed down the road to their hotel room. Cassandra brought out a pack of cigarillos and offered one to her partner. He took it and they both quickly lighted up. They walked and smoked in silence for a while.
This is a lot more difficult than I thought it would be, Kupo,
Carl started. Cassandra nodded and flicked some ash off her cigarillo. She was rather silent.
Not that we need any information anyway. We know they crashed near the Winston Company, that one of the passengers was a black-haired Mughal black mage, and that Eric's niece had studied at the Cyril School of Elemental Arts, Kupo. I don't need to be a detective to know where they are, Kupo.
Cassandra nodded again. Carl had finished his first cigarillo, and she offered him another one.
Thanks, Kupo. Anyway, what choice do we have? We know they're going to Beerland, and we know almost for certain they'll go by airship. We should set an ambush for them.
Those were the only words Cassandra had said for the entire day. Carl nodded and practically inhaled the rest of his second cigarillo.
Exactly what I was thinking, Kupo. Send a pigeon to Cyril and have them get me my war pinnace. We shall see what we can do, Kupo.